Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Legality. I'm your host, Richard Hoeg, managing member of the Hoeg Law business law firm of Northville, Michigan. And today we're going to dive into the murky world of Chinese-Hong Kong international relations. But as we do here in Virtual Legality, all through the lens of the kind of cultural items that we focus on in this space. Now, a number of you came out and asked me to talk about this particular topic, and I think a lot of that arose because one of the really long-form series that we did, maybe the first one that we did in this space, the so-called A Blizzard of Backlash series, was all focused on how Blizzard Entertainment or Activision Blizzard or however you want to think about that entity was dealing with the fallout of banning a major Hearthstone player for saying certain things at a Hearthstone tournament. If you aren't familiar with this story, in October of last year, as headlined here, Blizzard removed Blitzchung, the name of this individual, from Grandmasters and banned him from competing in Hearthstone following his on-stream Hong Kong protest. Blitzchung appeared on the official Hearthstone Taiwan stream after his Grandmasters match wearing a gas mask before shouting, "Liberate Hong Kong, revolution of our age." And the resulting aftermath of all that was a whole series of videos in which Blizzard tried to figure out how to say that they were for the concepts of freedom of speech while simultaneously not so much being for them. And this was all before the happenings of this past couple of weeks, which is the purpose of this video. So even in that space, Blizzard was dealing with trying to manage its relationships in China, the sales it wanted to make in China with the values of freedom of speech that they espoused at Blizzard, that most of the Western democracies espouse in general, and they were really struggling with it. And unfortunately, things just got a lot harder for all sorts of video game companies, everyone that really puts a microphone in front of anybody, due to a law that China just passed as of June 30th of this year. I think it went into effect on July 1st, called the Law of the People's Republic of China on Safeguarding National Security in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Just rolls off the tongue. I think most people are referring to it as the Hong Kong National Security Law. Now, this was such a big deal, and the language in this law we're going to look at in part, again, through the prism of what Blizzard and other video game companies are dealing with when they have to think about trying to comply with this law. After this went into effect, everybody responded. Congress, the House, the Senate, the presidency, going so far as the president issuing an executive order that basically said after this law passed, Hong Kong was no longer to be seen as independent from China and all the benefits that they had received through various treaties and trade rules here in the United States would no longer be honored because China was effectively taking over control of Hong Kong. And the highlighted act that I have shown here, which was passed only a couple of days ago here, basically penalized people in China that were seen as hurting autonomy at the Hong Kong level. And they're going to be penalized pursuant to United States law. They're going to have sanctions and such put upon them. And so there is a brewing kind of trade war, a war of words between China and the United States on this. I will leave it to brighter political minds than mine to really dive into all of those concepts. I know a number of you asked me to talk about this particular executive order and what's happening from the United States side of things. Suffice it to say, China did this thing. The United States is mad. And much like the kind of tariff war that you saw earlier in the Trump presidency, this is going to be the kind of thing where China and the United States rattle their sabers and they do certain things to each other. And I don't know where that foreign policy winds up. But underneath all of that, underneath these giant world power titans kind of clashing on these concepts, you have entities, yes, big ones, multinational companies in general, trying to deal with the fallout. And so in order to understand how they've been trapped here, and to some extent it's a trap of their own making because, as we said in the Blizzard of Backlash series, the Blizzards of the world, the National Basketball Associations of the world, by trying to bend over a little bit, have essentially created this kind of situation where they've painted themselves in a corner. And now that a law like this is passed, now that it is effective in China, in Hong Kong, and as we will see, parts beyond, they have a major, major problem with trying to run their businesses. And I think the best way to understand that is to go through some of the specifics of the law. Now, this law is made up of a number of quote-unquote articles, really basically paragraphs that detail what the restrictions are and things of the like. And I have put in the description to this video a full copy of the law so that you can see it. Of course, it's translated, but we are only going to be talking about specific highlights in order to understand what corporations, what gaming companies, and what entertainment companies in general, especially those operating in China that originate in the United States, are having to deal with. So this is Article 1. This is the main kind of mission statement for the law. And it says, this law is enacted for the purpose of preventing, suppressing, and imposing punishment for the offenses of secession, subversion, organization and perpetration of terrorist activities, and collusion with a foreign country or with external elements to endanger national security in relation to the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. That's Hong Kong to you and I. It's called a Special Administrative Region due to the kind of transfer of power from Britain to China and the rules that really have gone along with that since that transfer occurred. But these are the 4 categories of offenses that this law puts into place. That also puts into place a number of kind of additional government bodies that are going to be judging whether there's a violation of this law that China is going to have more control over than usual. We're not going to go into the kind of structural framework here. We're going to focus on these points, and in particular, points 1, 2, and 4, secession, subversion, and collusion. We're not going to go into terrorist activities so much because the law, at least as written, really does talk about threats of violence, threats of destruction that are a little bit more unlikely to come up in the context of a Hearthstone tournament. So we're going to skip that section, but it's largely a copy of the sections that we are going to look at. So let's start with secession. This is the first offense that they define. It says a person who organizes, plans, commits, or participates in any of the following acts, and that'll be on the next page, whether or not by force or threat of force, so in legal terms, it doesn't matter if you are implying a use of force or not, with a view to committing secession or undermining national unification, shall be guilty of this offense, secession. And that's in Article 20 of the law. And so it's anybody that participates in one of the following acts. And that's an act that would have the tendency of causing the separation of Hong Kong from China, altering by unlawful means the legal status of Hong Kong or any other part of China, or surrendering Hong Kong or any other part of China to a foreign country. Now, you see that phrase, unlawful means, that's going to come up in a number of places. It's not a defined term in this law, and certainly when you're dealing with a country like China that doesn't share the kind of baseline precedent of the Western legal framework, I have a feeling that unlawful means can be a lot of whatever they want it to mean in specific circumstances. We're going to talk about that as we get into some of the other definitions, but suffice it to say, if you are a person who participates in saying something with a view towards causing the separation of Hong Kong from China, you would be guilty of secession in all likelihood. So we ask ourselves, is that the kind of thing that Blitzchung would be guilty of when he says liberate Hong Kong on a broadcast internationally? I think the answer to that is yes. This law put in place would suggest that Blitzchung saying that, or anybody else saying that, on a Blizzard broadcast or a Bungie broadcast or an Activision broadcast or wherever it might be, on Twitch, perhaps, as an Amazon company, says free Hong Kong, then they are probably guilty of committing the offense of secession under this new law. And as we'll see, that's a problem because of the breadth of this law. Now, if we look at subversion, things get a little bit more heightened. This has the same kind of language about organizing, planning, committing, or participating, but it requires force or threat of force, which you say, okay, that makes sense. That's the kind of normal incident to violence that we think about in freedom of speech laws, even here in the United States. And that it drags in this other phrase that doesn't have any specific meaning, other unlawful means. And when you're talking about a country like China, you're talking about a country that is passing a law like this one, is just any kind of statement that would have the tendency to potentially cause trouble for the government. Is that unlawful means? And I think if they want it to be, it can be. And this is done with a view towards subverting the state power. If you have the tendency to subvert state power and you participate in this kind of activity, including speech, then you could be guilty of the crime of subversion under this new law. And what are those activities that are a problem for China? Overthrowing or undermining the basic systems of China, overthrowing the Chinese or Hong Kong government, seriously interfering or undermining the performance of the Chinese or Hong Kong government, or attacking or damaging essentially the buildings where the Hong Kong government performs its duties and functions such that it is no longer able to perform those duties or functions. So if you do something that has the tendency to cause one of these actions and it's deemed to be through unlawful means, then you are potentially guilty of the crime of subversion in China. Now, if you look at this law and you say, hey, Rick, that actually reminds me of something even in American history, hey, good for you, I don't blame you. This actually mirrors some of the language that is one of our most infamous laws shortly after the founding of the United States. Here we have the historical highlights from history.house.gov. It says the Sedition Act of 1798 was passed permitting the deportation, fine, or imprisonment of anyone deemed a threat or publishing false, scandalous, or malicious writing against the government of the United States. So we here in America, Americans, United States citizens, are guilty, at least historically, of the same kind of concepting, right? A few years after the formation of our particular republic, we said, whoa, if you say things that are too mean about the government, that should be a problem. Even though the First Amendment of our Constitution says freedom of speech is paramount. As James Madison would say here, as quoted in this web article, what will be the situation of the people? Not free, because they will be compelled to make their election between competitors whose pretensions they are not permitted by act equally to examine, to discuss, and or to ascertain. Said another way, if you aren't allowed to criticize the function of government, you aren't allowed to criticize the functionaries of that government, the people that actually run it. And in the United States, that wound up being a significant problem. John Adams never won re-election. Thomas Jefferson took it over, and this act was allowed to expire. But for a point in time, the United States Congress felt similarly to the Chinese rule that said, hey, if you are thinking about overthrowing the basic systems of China or the Chinese government, that should be a crime. And of course, it isn't in the United States anymore. We criticize our government all the time. I think you could probably pull out a half dozen videos here in Virtual Legality that criticize our American government, and we feel strongly about that freedom being important. Now let's talk about collusion. Again, we're skipping the kind of terroristic threats because they were written, at least in this law, to be what we would expect, actual threats that will incite violence against somebody, arson, destruction, that kind of thing. But collusion is something that, again, can grab these companies that we're talking about. Collusion, as defined in this new law, refers to a person who steals or unlawfully provides state secrets or intelligence concerning national security for a foreign country or institution, organization, or individual outside of China or Hong Kong or Macau. And I've defined it here because they use this phrase a lot as a foreign party, but it's used in the same manner throughout this particular article of the law. So the first bullet here is you're guilty of collusion if you steal state secrets or provide them to a foreign party. But note, state secrets isn't a defined term, and just like unlawful means, that term is going to come back, and in a very important way. So if you've got a kind of concept where somebody is potentially transferring information outside of China, maybe through a broadcast or otherwise, and that information is deemed to be a state secret, essentially by the ambit of China on its own, there's no definition provided, so it's whatever China wants to believe are state secrets, you could be guilty of collusion. The other more broad definition that really starts to get United States corporations concerned or otherwise hot under the collar says you are also guilty of collusion if you request a foreign party or conspire with a foreign party or directly or indirectly receive instructions, control, funding, or other kinds of support from a foreign party to commit any of the following, the acts that we're going to see on the next page. But look at the breadth of this language. Sure, if you request that the United States or Blizzard helps you do this thing, that's one thing. If you conspire with them, you discussed it beforehand, you tell Blizzard, hey, I'm going to say this, and they say, fine, you can say it on the broadcast. Okay, that's kind of conspiring with. Or you directly or indirectly receive support from. Now, this person was put on an international broadcast with a certain amount of viewership, given a microphone. Is that not support? And more importantly, when we're asking this question, could somebody in China make the case that it is support? And that is undoubtedly the truth. So when you're an American company, when you are operating in this space, you have to imagine what is the most negative way that somebody in China could interpret this rule that they have put forth, which is one of the reasons why if you go and you look at other articles on Google or elsewhere, you'll see videos, you'll see commentary that says there is a chilling effect as of this law going into effect on its own, which is to say, since we don't know what China will do, China doesn't actually have to do anything. Not right now. They don't have to go and sue or otherwise fine or imprison people that work at Blizzard that are otherwise in China that they have access to. They don't have to do those things right now because the rules, the words on the page suggest that they can. And once they have that suggestion in place, corporations have to start looking at things as if they could happen. And now they don't do things that they otherwise would have the right to do because China could come down on them, and they don't want that. So indirectly receives other kinds of support is as broad as you can possibly write this. Now, support for what? We get even broader. As we start out, things make at least a little bit of sense. If you are making statements about waging a war against China or using or threatening to use force to undermine its sovereignty, okay, that's category 1. If you're seriously disrupting the formulation and implementation of laws or policies by the governments, and it's likely to cause serious consequences. So that's the same kind of concept in the United States. It says if you're just kind of puffing, if you're saying stuff on Facebook or Twitter or elsewise, it shouldn't be that big of a deal. It is likely to cause serious consequences. You mean it. It's something that can imminently happen. That's not as clear here in this language, but I will give at least a certain amount of benefit of the doubt for it being a translation. And it seems to be the intent that they don't want this to just be applied if it's not going to cause serious consequences. But of course, they're the ones that are the judge, jury, and executioner on these particular issues. Category 3 is rigging or undermining an election. Again, makes sense. Category 4 is where entities start to get in trouble that aren't necessarily gaming companies, right? So if you impose sanctions or a blockade or engage in other hostile activities against Hong Kong or China, that's a category of things that could land you in collusion. So remember what the Trump executive order says. Remember what the new act in the legislature as codified in the law of the United States says. It says these people that are undermining the autonomy of Hong Kong are going to receive these sanctions. How do you actually get sanctioned? You have a financial institution that can put a lien or freeze or do something else to somebody's accounts. And now you have a financial institution that has to operate in Hong Kong and has to, quote unquote, conspire with a foreign party for an act that is specifically called out, imposing sanctions or engaging in other hostile activities against Hong Kong or China. So you're imposing sanctions on somebody doing China's work to undermine the autonomy of Hong Kong, and now you're stuck because Washington says you have to do this thing and Beijing says you have to do this thing, and now you've got real problems with all the financial institutions and the financial markets that are currently operating in China. It's really one of the reasons you saw Washington act as fast as they did, is because once this goes into place, once you have a directive that says you can't impose sanctions here for the benefit of a foreign party, you wind up getting into these significant fights. And so that's a big deal. But for our purposes, it's not the biggest deal. No. For our purposes, paragraph 5 here, that's the big deal. So if you, again, receive indirect support from a party, like access to a Twitch stream that has a certain amount of popularity, a microphone, maybe the award money for participating in the tournament itself could be put into this bucket, and you provoke by unlawful means, who knows what that means, hatred among Hong Kong residents towards China or Hong Kong governments, which is likely to cause serious consequences, then you are involved in collusion. So, can you make the case that somebody saying liberate Hong Kong, somebody saying free Hong Kong on a service, on a stream that Blizzard provides, maybe Blizzard, quote unquote, indirectly encourages by having all these people come into a place where they're awarding cash money, prizes, access to something where you could make more money. And you get into this situation where are you invoking hatred against Chinese government by saying things like free Hong Kong? And I think you start to get there, but it gets worse for these companies. It really does. So not only do those people potentially have the liability, it's easy enough to say Blitzchung has the liability, or the people holding up that sign in a Blizzard stream have that liability. But China would impose that liability on those that assist them as well. So even if you can't make the direct case that Blizzard was involved or knew about or conspired with or did any of the things that we just talked about, all of these extra provisions pop into place to say, they're guilty anyway. A person who assists in or provides financial assistance or property for the commission by other persons of the offense of secession or subversion will be guilty of that offense. So again, if you provide the access point that allows this message to be distributed, are you guilty of the offense? These are the kinds of things that Blizzard has to be thinking about. And everybody that runs a Twitch stream has to be thinking about after this law went into place. And no, we don't have any instances of China acting against these kinds of companies right now. But the point is that the chilling effect is so substantial that all of these companies, as this was passed, undoubtedly had in-house counsel and outside counsel advising them and saying, well, you have to really think about what you allow. Do you vet statements? Do you even allow any kind of open microphone setting? And I think the answer might be no. In respect of collusion, you see a kind of different framework for how this is described in Article 29. The foreign party referred to in respect of a collusion offense shall be convicted and punished for the same offense. So when we talk about collusion, remember you're working with a foreign party of some kind. Whoever that foreign party is, they're guilty of the same offense. So when they provided that Twitch stream or that award money or anything else, China says if we find Blitzchung guilty, Blizzard's guilty in all likelihood. And that creates a certain amount of problems for them because when you are guilty, things happen to your company. A company which commits an offense under this law shall be imposed with a criminal fine, and the operation of that company shall be suspended or its license revoked if it has been punished for committing an offense under this law. That's where the rubber hits the road, right? Blizzard probably at a fundamental level does believe in the freedom of speech. Certainly most of their people do. But on the business level, they don't want to have their license. They don't want to have their access. They don't want to have their presence in the Chinese market revoked. And so that's why you saw them bending over backwards in October of last year. That's why you've seen other entities doing the same thing. But now, if you could be liable anyway, criminal fines, penalties, potentially your vice president in prison if they can access that person's body and put them there. And now you lose your license anyway. Well, every company has to re-examine their output, has to re-examine how they operate. And I think a number of companies that don't necessarily have the same world ambitions as the Activision Blizzards of the world will step out of the market entirely. This is way too much heat for most companies, right? You don't want to start dealing with the Chinese government on issues that you don't actually control. Blizzard didn't want Blitzchung to yell that out on their broadcast, and he did so anyway. But the real kicker is this. One, everything's secret. So if a foreign factor is involved with one of these cases, we might not ever hear about it. When circumstances arise, such as the trial involving state secrets or public order, which is basically every single aspect of this law, all or part of the trial shall be closed to the media, and the Secretary for Justice may issue a certificate directing that the case shall be tried without a jury on the grounds of, among other reasons, the protection of state secrets, again undefined, or involvement of foreign factors, which is what we are concerned with in this video. And if you think China can't reach them, then the real kicker follows. The real kicker. This law shall apply to offenses committed against Hong Kong from outside Hong Kong by a person who is not a permanent resident of Hong Kong. Let me break that down even further, even though I think you can all see what it means. This particular law, passed by the Chinese government, imposed on the citizens of Hong Kong, ostensibly to help strengthen national security, is held by China to apply to every person, entity, organization, and otherwise on the face of the planet Earth and beyond. Said another way, if you are in a location or otherwise operating in a country that has some kind of extradition or other treaty with China, now you have to be concerned even though you don't operate in China. Because if you have something on your blog post that says something about Hong Kong, or that could be viewed as secession or subversive or collusive, or heck, maybe even terroristic, depending on whether or not you find yourself in that section of the law, you have to start worrying about this because China has just told the world that they think they have jurisdiction over you. They think they have jurisdiction over potentially imprisoning the individuals responsible for that kind of activity. And so now everyone, everywhere, has to start thinking about what kind of context they can maintain with China. And hopefully a number of these jurisdictions start deciding whether or not they can even continue to have those kinds of contracts with China, those kinds of treaties that allow potentially individuals that maybe have never been to Hong Kong to be removed to China for prosecution, and imprisonment. And so you combine all of these things. And the Blizzard of Backlash, as of now, July 2020, is much, much, much worse than it was in October of last year. And so Blizzard, yes, they made their bed to some extent, but nobody can really be asked to comply with everything that is put forth in this law, especially when, while we're analyzing the words here, there's really no guarantee that any kind of Chinese magistrate or otherwise hidden tribunal will actually follow the words on the page. And once you get those situations combined, you have real problems for real multinational entities, which in fact we see outside of video gaming, right? Just a couple days ago, we have this article, NBA halts personalizing of apparel. You used to be able to write whatever you wanted on the back of a uniform and buy it for a premium. The NBA made a lot of money. Following free Hong Kong controversy, sports fans on Thursday found that they could no longer order customized apparel from the National Basketball Association's official website after the organization sparked a major backlash by appearing to ban the phrase "Free Hong Kong" from customized jerseys. We've got here Clay Travis. He says the NBA bans you, the fan, from putting "Free Hong Kong" on customized league jerseys, even as they allow players to wear customized jerseys. That's kind of the sidelight story here, is that in what they hope to be a bubble season here in the age of 2020, they are allowing the players in their league to pick kind of social media-based messages or other kind of social justice messages to put on the back of their uniform. So other people wanted to put other messages on the uniforms that they were buying. And it appears, based on this reporting and some other articles that you can read, that Free Hong Kong was banned. And then rather having that press out there, they just decided to turn the whole thing off. Fox News cited an NBA spokesperson who confirmed that the process for ordering personalized apparel had been disabled. Based on attempts to include violent, abusive, and hateful messages on personalized NBA jerseys, the personalization feature has been disabled on NBAstore.com, the spokesperson said. And this article says it's unclear what message fans were trying to publish that ran afoul of the rules, but since we are living in the age of the internet, certainly someone somewhere said something using some kind of word that the NBA could at least point to say, you know what, that's just too far, and we have to turn it all off. It has nothing to do with that whole Hong Kong or Chinese law issue. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. We just couldn't allow it anymore, even though we've done this for quite some time. But as you can see, it didn't work entirely because it's still being reported in part as you killed personalizing after you had a free Hong Kong problem. So this story of the national security law, this story of Activision Blizzard and them dealing with all of the fallout of these particular problems, it doesn't end with them. It doesn't end with video gaming. Every United States company, every European country, anywhere has to now start dealing with the fact that China has gone out and said that they can impose these sanctions, these imprisonments, these fines, certainly the loss of business licensure on anyone operating anywhere in the world, all based on language that is very, very broad and in large part outside of the company's control. So if you favor freedom of speech, if you like to see battle of ideas out there, whether or not you agree with the idea, if you like to see those things, as I do, this is the kind of activity, this is the kind of law, rule, regulation that everybody should be standing up against, because it doesn't have a place in society now. It didn't have a place in society in 1798. And if we want to continue to be as free as we possibly can be, it doesn't have a place in society in video games or our entertainment media in general. This has been Virtual Legality for today. I hope you found it insightful and educational. I really like putting together those slides that help break down really complicated laws. I've done that in the past. I've did slides with respect to a lot of Blizzard of Backlash stuff, so please do check out that playlist if you're interested in more there. I think there's probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 hours of content if you want the background from late last year and I think maybe into early this year. This video will also likely go at the end of that Blizzard of Backlash series because I do think it relates to that topic matter. Otherwise, we are talking about these kinds of things in this space all the time. You can see on your screen, we've recently been covering a lot of the back and forth with respect to Dr. Disrespect and his ban from Twitch, because it's a very interesting corporate contractual kind of dispute, especially with no one talking, and then maybe even more with just a little bit of talk coming out from the Dr. Disrespect side. So if you're interested in that, check that out. And if you are otherwise liking this material, like, subscribe, ring bells, tell everybody that we're here. We love having conversations with new folks. We have had just a tremendous amount of growth at the channel here in the last 28 days or so. We'd love to keep that up. We'd love to see more of you. And otherwise, if you caught this on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. And if you listen to it as a podcast, thank you so much for listening. and I will catch you on the very next episode of Virtual Legality. Virtual Legality is a YouTube video series with audio podcast versions presented as commentary and for education and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you have legal questions about the topics discussed, please consult your own legal counsel.